former Valley chef accused of killing his ex-wife and two children on Christmas Day in 2017 is on trial this week. Anthony Milan Ross is facing 3 counts of murder and 20 counts of aggravated assault after a shootout with police. Witnesses told police that Ross shot his wife, Iris, outside a North Phoenix apartment complex before barricading himself inside for more than 6 hours. Police say that Ross shot his 2 children, 11-year-old Nigel and 10-month-old Anora, before officers stormed inside. Ross was known for losing weight through a vegan diet and often made TV appearances before the murders. If convicted, Ross could face the death penalty.
On Christmas Eve 2017, at 2:52 in the afternoon, Anthony Milan Ross posted a video to Facebook. In it, he's singing with his 11-year-old son, Nigel, laughing, smiling, a father and son sharing a moment that would be viewed more than 235,000 times.
Sorry. You better watch out.
You better not cry.
You better not pout.
I'm telling you why. Santa Claus is coming to town.
The caption reads, "I'm smiling and I'm hanging out with Nigel on Christmas Eve, and we're about to embarrass ourselves. We're going to sing." They sing Santa Claus is coming to town. Nigel giggles. The video ends. Milan looks like the man the world knew him to be, a transformed weight loss champion, a motivational speaker, a dedicated father. But while that video was uploading to the internet, something else was happening on Milan's phone, something darker, something planned. In less than an hour, the singing would stop, the shooting would start, and a family would be erased. This is the story of a man who taught millions how to transform their lives while hiding a predatory past so dark that his own daughters would later testify he starved them for a year as punishment. This is the vegan magician's massacre, and the evidence reveals something even more chilling than the crime itself. This wasn't a moment of rage. It was a project. Calculated, researched, methodical. I'm going to walk you through the digital forensics, the hidden family he abandoned, the psychological profile of a narcissist in freefall, and the moment the mask finally came off in court. His name was Anthony Milan Ross, but the world knew him as Milan. By November 2017, less than 2 months before Christmas, Milan was a household name in Arizona. He had done what millions of people only dream about. He had lost 300 pounds. At his heaviest, and Milan weighed 518 pounds, over half his body weight gone. But the origin story of his transformation was emotional. Designed to sell the dream, he told everyone the same story. The moment that changed everything happened at Universal Studios in Los Angeles. Milan wanted to ride the Harry Potter and the Forbidden Journey roller coaster with his young son, Nigel. They stood in line. Nigel was excited. Milan was present. They reached the front of the line. Milan sat in the seat. The safety bar came down. It wouldn't click, wouldn't lock. He was still too wide. Security told him he couldn't ride. He had to get up. He had to walk past hundreds of people, all watching back down the line in shame. He watched his son's face fall. That's the story Milan told on television, in interviews, in his book, at speaking engagements. "And that's when I realized," he'd say, "my decisions don't just affect me, they affect the people I love." The story was powerful, it was relatable, it was inspiring. But something felt off because the real truth about who Milan was didn't fit the narrative. And Milan was obsessed with narrative control. Before we get into how this story takes such a dark turn, let's pause for a moment. This channel brings together people from all over the world, so drop your city and state in the comments. I'd love to see where you're watching from. If you value these deep dives and the way we tell these stories, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Your support helps keep these conversations going and ensures the victims are never forgotten. Now let's return to the story and take a closer look at Milan's rise to fame. By 2014, Milan had turned his weight loss into a brand, a lifestyle, a movement. He called himself the Vegan Magician. He appeared on Good Morning Arizona at the Scottsdale Food Festival. He was featured in vegan documentaries alongside Samuel L. Jackson. He opened restaurants. He hosted pop-up dining events. He wrote a book called The Change. His catchphrase was simple: "If I can do it, you can too." Everyone believed him. The transformation was real. You could see it in the photos. Before and after. The evidence was literal, visible. But what the world didn't see was behind closed doors. In his marriage, in his businesses, in his bank accounts. Because while Milan was brilliant at being famous, he was terrible at running actual businesses. His restaurants failed, not just one, multiple. And court documents show he had a recent traffic ticket for driving with a suspended license, and the reason his license was suspended isn't documented. But it points to someone who was spiraling. Someone who was losing control of the practical aspects of his life, even as he was gaining more camera time. By 2017, Milan owed $60,000 in debt. Credit cards, business loans, money he'd borrowed from employees. He wasn't earning enough to support the lifestyle he'd created. And there was only one person keeping that lifestyle alive: his wife, Iris. Iris made $150,000 a year as an administrator at St. Joseph's Hospital's outpatient surgery centre. Milan made roughly $30,000. The math was clear. Milan's celebrity was a parasite, and Iris was the host. As part of their divorce settlement, Milan would have owed Iris $766 a month in child support since she made significantly more than him annually. For a narcissist, this was unacceptable. Milan had spent a decade building an identity as a man who had conquered himself. A man of discipline, a man who had succeeded against all odds. But the success was a facade. And when you're a narcissist whose entire identity is built on winning, losing your financial independence to your wife is the ultimate humiliation. Iris started confiding in friends. She told them Milan had become paranoid, controlling. He tracked her phone constantly. He demanded to know where she was every single moment of the day. He accused her of infidelity without evidence. Mary Wogas, Iris's sister. I told Arizona's ABC 15 that Ross would swing from yelling and demeaning Iris one moment to telling her how much he loved her and wanted them to be a family unit the next. But it got darker. Wogas said Milan claimed he was working with a voodoo priest in New Orleans to put a hex on Iris. Just very, very dark intentions. This wasn't just a controlling husband. This was someone whose grip on reality was fragmenting, who was cycling between emotional desperation and magical thinking. One moment, I love you, let's work this out. Next moment, I'm putting a curse on you through a voodoo priest. For Iris, walking into her own home had become like walking into a minefield. She was living with a man who was publicly adored but privately unhinged. And she made a decision. She was going to leave. But before we understand what happened on Christmas Day, we have to understand the man Milan was running from. Because Milan didn't just appear in Phoenix in 2009 fully formed as a vegan guru. He had a life before that, a life he spent years burying. Back in 2003 in St. Louis, Missouri, Anthony Milan Ross was married to a woman named Nicole. They had 4 daughters together. 4. Not 1, not 2, 4. Let that sink in for a moment. Milan had an entire family, children, and one day in 2003, he walked out the door and never came back. According to his oldest daughter Ebony, Milan simply abandoned them. Nicole was left to raise 4 girls alone with no explanation and no support. No child support, no contact, no explanation, nothing. It took years for Iris to even find out these daughters existed. Between 4 and 7 years into her marriage with Milan, Iris discovered that he had a previous marriage that he had abandoned to be with her. Imagine that moment. You're married to someone. You think you know them, and then you find out they have an entire family they erased from their life like they were disposable. When this came to light, Iris felt something shift. She'd later tell her roommate, Luciana Echeverria, that Iris felt the breach was that she didn't have a choice in marrying a man with this secret past. She realized, if he could walk away from 4 daughters and never look back, what would stop him from abandoning Nigel and Anora? During the trial, so Milan's Missouri daughters Ebony and Shalonda finally had the chance to tell the world who their father really was. Not a vegan magician, a monster. Ebony described a year-long punishment where Milan would withhold food. She said he would blow the smell of the chili cheese sauce in our face, while they were only allowed to eat plain rice with no butter, no sugar for an entire year. It wasn't about health, it was about psychological control, breaking their spirits, making them understand that he had absolute power over them. And there was physical abuse. Another sister testified that she had to stay home from school for days at a time because the bruises on her face were too visible. Milan didn't want teachers asking questions. He wanted his house to be a fortress, a place where he was the absolute ruler, where everyone obeyed, where there was no outside interference. One expert noted during trial that while child abuse is serious, the fact that he would allegedly choke and strangle them is a 100% precursor in domestic violence to murder. This is the key insight. Milan's abuse pattern was consistent. It started with his daughters in Missouri. It continued with Iris in Arizona. And it was escalating. The Missouri daughters knew something the world didn't. A man who doesn't take responsibility for his past is a man destined to repeat it. When Iris discovered the truth about Milan's Missouri family, everything changed in their marriage. Not just the marriage, her understanding of who she'd married. She realized the man who preached transformation had never actually transformed. He'd just changed the stage, changed the audience, crafted a new identity. And she began fighting for sole custody of the children. A talk with the Missouri daughters who Milan kept secret may have pushed Iris to fight harder for sole custody of Nigel and Anora. Iris was trying to protect her children from a pattern of abuse she now understood was deeply embedded in Milan's psychology. And Milan felt it. He felt control slipping away. His wife was trying to take his children, expose his secrets, destroy the brand he'd spent a decade building. For a narcissist with a history of violence, there is no worse threat than a woman who knows your secrets and is willing to use them against you. Shalonda Ross, one of Milan's Missouri daughters, later warned victims of domestic violence. Please don't think it can never be you because you will wake up one day and you'll feel like you're in a nightmare. Her sister Ebony, and she both said they would willingly testify if Milan went to trial. They would, and they did. By June 2017, Iris filed for divorce, 6 months before Christmas, 6 months before the murders. Milan's world was collapsing. Not just his marriage, his entire identity was under threat. The restaurants were gone, the celebrity was fading. The TV appearances had dried up. His 5 minutes of daytime TV fame was up. The money, the success is all a facade. And so was the perfect family, as the prosecutor would later tell the jury. Milan was broke. His wife was leaving him. And she was taking the children. More importantly, she was taking his narrative, his story, his brand. At one point during the divorce process, Milan called Iris a whore and said he was working with a voodoo priest to put a hex on her. The verbal abuse escalated. The paranoia deepened. He was becoming unhinged. Iris was scared, genuinely terrified. She started moving her money. She removed Milan from her checking account after discovering he was making unauthorized withdrawals to pay off his mounting debts. This action removing him from the account was a turning point. It cut off his last source of financial control. It made the separation real, irreversible. For Milan, It was the final insult. His wife had the power, the money, the custody of the children. He had nothing. In the weeks before Christmas, Milan's mental state deteriorated rapidly. He wasn't sleeping. Defense records would later claim he was going through periods of poor sleep or even no sleep. He was posting online, on men's rights forums. He portrayed himself as a victim, but talking about vindictive wives who try to take everything. He asked other users how to fight back against a vengeful spouse. He was building a narrative in his head where he was the wronged party, the victim, the man being destroyed by a system that favored his ex-wife. In his mind, what was about to happen wasn't murder. It was justice. It was getting even. It was taking back what was his. But while he was venting online and spiraling emotionally, something else was happening. Something clinical. Something calculated. He was researching. Detectives would later seize Milan's phone and computer. What they found was a step-by-step blueprint of a planned massacre. This is important. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was a project. Investigators unraveled a chilling plan, which started with sinister internet searches for firearms, a battery acid, sulfuric acid, skin-melting acid, and silencers. Let's break this down chronologically, because the timeline itself tells the story. December 10th. Milan began searching for information on life insurance payouts specifically, how much money he would get if his wife died. He looked up whether a suicide or homicide changed the payout. He was calculating the financial benefit of her death. He was checking his profit margin on murdering his wife. December 15th. The searches shifted. He looked up information about forensic evidence collection, DNA at crime scenes, battery acid, silencers, and guns. He was trying to understand how to commit the perfect crime, how to cover his tracks, how to make the evidence disappear. December 20th, 5 days before the murders. The searches turned stomach-turning. He looked up how long it takes for a human body to decompose, the timeline, the smell, how fast evidence would rot away. This is when Iris sent that text to her sister, the one where she wrote, "I'm scared. I don't know what he'll do when I tell him I'm actually leaving this time." She had no idea that on the exact same day she was expressing her fear, Milan was researching how long a body would take to decompose. Milan also looked up news stories about other families slaughtered on Christmas Day. He was studying other killers, learning from their mistakes, making sure he didn't get caught the way they did. During the trial, prosecutor Richard Dusterhoft revealed that Ross had even warned others to expect something big on Christmas. He was telegraphing his plan, preparing people psychologically to expect violence from him, or making it sound like a joke, a performance. While all of this was happening, Milan was still posting inspiring content, still telling his followers to stay positive, still performing the role of the transformed man. Two versions of Milan existed simultaneously. The man on Facebook, posting Christmas videos with his son. The man is on his computer, researching how to dissolve bodies. On Christmas Eve, at 2:52 p.m., Milan posted the video. It was the perfect alibi, the perfect narrative, the perfect mask. A father and son singing carols, wishing everyone Merry Christmas. The video would later be viewed 235,000 times. It was evidence of his love, his presence, his transformation. But here's what matters about that timestamp, 2:52 p.m. Because at exactly 3:45 p.m., 53 minutes later, Iris pulled into the apartment complex near 16th Street and Highland Avenue. She was coming to pick up the children. She thought she was walking into a normal holiday handoff. She had no idea she was walking into an execution. Milan was waiting for her. Witnesses saw what happened next. According to court documents, witnesses told police they saw Milan shoot his ex-wife as she tried to run away from him. When witnesses asked if she was okay, he responded with a no and pointed his gun at them. Iris was shot on the patio. She was 38 years old. Then Milan turned and walked back into the apartment. Calmly. He didn't run. He didn't panic. Witnesses said he looked composed. Inside, his 2 children were waiting. For the next several hours, the world watched as Phoenix SWAT surrounded the apartment. For 6 hours, the negotiators tried to reach him, tried to convince him to surrender, tried to save the children. But Milan had already made his decision about the children. He told the officers coldly, "I already killed them." His voice was steady. He sounded like a man who had completed a task. Around 2:52 p.m., the exact same time he posted the singing video, Milan sent 2 text messages to Mary Wogus, Iris's sister. The first said, "I just killed Iris and the kids." The second said, "With a gun." He was confessing, narrating his crime, making sure someone knew what he'd done. Mary later told ABC 15, "I knew that man was very unstable. I knew he had a very, very dark side. I didn't know it was this dark." But she also said something else. "I received a text yesterday about 2:52 p.m. That timestamp is important, because 2:52 p.m. is when he posted the video with Nigel singing. So the timeline was 2:52 p.m. Posts Happy Christmas video with son, 2:52 p.m. Sends confession text to Iris's sister saying he killed them all 3:45 p.m. Iris arrives at the apartment shortly after. Iris is shot dead on the patio. The confession came before the actual killing of Iris, which means Milan was already psychologically committed. He'd already decided. The video was the last performance. The text was the announcement. Everything after that was the execution of a plan he'd finalized in his mind. When SWAT arrived, Milan barricaded himself inside. He didn't surrender. He didn't beg for his life. He didn't show remorse. Hours into the standoff, a robot deployed by the Special Assignments Unit found Anora dead inside the apartment. Around 7:30 p.m., police cut the power and entered the apartment as Ross opened fire, injuring one officer who was struck by shrapnel. Milan was shooting at police, actively engaging, fighting. But this wasn't a desperate man fighting for survival. This was a man still performing, still centre stage, still the protagonist of his own story. When police finally apprehended him, he didn't scream. He didn't ask questions, he just asked for a lawyer. He was thinking about his defence, his legal strategy, his image. As officers led him out in his white t-shirt and red shorts, Milan looked at the cameras. He was still performing. Even in defeat, even with 3 bodies behind him, he was thinking about how he looked, how he was being perceived. This detail reveals everything about who Milan was. A man for whom image was more important than life itself. His children's lives, his wife's life, his own humanity. The trial didn't begin until September 2024, nearly 7 years after the murders. Prosecutors described Ross as someone obsessed with being a celebrity, whose success was a facade, and whose world came crashing down when his wife filed for divorce 6 months before the murders. Prosecutor Richard Dusterhoft opened by telling the jury, he thought about it before he did it. He meant to do it, and then he did it. Why? The prosecution presented the digital evidence, the searches for decomposition, the life insurance payouts, the battery acid, the silencers, the other family killings he researched. They presented the video timestamp, 2:52 p.m. Then the 911 call, 3:45 p.m. The jury could do the math. The singing stopped, and the killing started. They presented forensic evidence, the autopsies, the bodies of his children. But Milan's most revealing moment came during testimony. One investigator testified that in 20 years of law enforcement, he'd never seen anything like Milan. Complete indifference. When police told him his children were dead, he didn't scream. He didn't ask questions. He just asked for a lawyer. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. On November 3rd, 2025, they returned. Guilty. Guilty on all 3 counts of first-degree murder. He was also found guilty on 3 counts of aggravated assault stemming from the murder, and 17 counts of aggravated assault on a peace officer. Ross's sentencing is scheduled for January 9, 2026. Prosecutors are seeking the death penalty for the 3 first-degree murder convictions. But regardless of what sentence he receives, Milan has already lost what mattered most to him: his narrative, his image, his ability to control how he's perceived. He is no longer the vegan magician. He's no longer Milan Ross, the man who transformed himself. He is now prisoner number T 423048 in the Lower Buckeye Jail facility. A number, an inmate, a murderer. The thing that kept Milan alive, his sense of self, his carefully constructed identity, his ability to perform and persuade and transform, has been stripped away. In court, surrounded by the victims' families, surrounded by the evidence of his crimes, Milan finally could not hide who he was. Anthony Milan Ross proves something terrifying. A person can transform their body without ever transforming their soul. He lost £300. He became a celebrity. He influenced thousands of people. He appeared alongside Samuel L. in Jackson and James Cameron. He was on television in his local market, but inside, he was still the man from Missouri. Still abusing, still controlling, still violent. The transformation was a mask, a better-fitting costume. What happened to his Missouri daughters? The starvation, the physical abuse, the psychological was a preview of what would happen to Iris. What would have eventually happened to Nigel and Anora if this hadn't ended in violence. Abusers escalate. They don't improve. They don't change. They just move to new victims. Iris saw the pattern. She tried to escape. She gathered evidence. She removed herself financially. She was doing everything right. But she underestimated how far a narcissist will go when they feel the loss of control. She didn't know about the research, the decomposition studies, the life insurance calculations. She was escaping a predator without knowing the predator had already built the trap. And the children Nigel, who loved his father so much he performed with him on camera. Anora, who was barely old enough to smile, had no choice. They were casualties of Milan's need to own the ending of his own story. Because that's ultimately what this was. Milan couldn't accept that his story had a bad ending. A failed marriage, a failed business, a failed transformation. So he rewrote it. He made himself the one who ended the story. The one with the power. The one in control, even if that control came in the form of a gun and 3 bodies. Iris was 38 years old. She was an administrator at the St. Joseph's Outpatient Surgery Centre. She would go out of her way to make your day better. There was just no stopping her. Her ambition was always through the roof. Nigel was 11. He had a really cool personality that landed him on stage performing with his peers. Anora was 10 months old. She was just starting to crawl. These aren't statistics. These aren't plot points. These were people with futures that were stolen from them. The case leaves us with a chilling truth. Domestic violence often hides behind a perfect smile and a verified blue checkmark. Behind a transformation story, behind a narrative of success. If you are in danger, or you know someone who is, the National Domestic Violence Hotline is available 24/7 at 1-800-799-7233. The line between being left and being killed can be measured in the research time on a killer's phone. The line between a transformation and a lie can be as thin as a father singing carols with his son hours before shooting him dead. Thank you for staying with me through this deep investigation. These stories are heavy. These stories demand our attention. Because the victims deserve to be remembered. Not as victims of tragedy, but as people who deserved to live. Iris, Nigel, Anora. Remember their names. I'm Offshore Crime Archives. I'll see you in the next one.